this evening, budget session on finance. I call the meeting to order. Mr. Hanlon, you have the task of reading all the bills. You ready to roll?
Okay.
You have order?
Yep.
Okay.
Bill
Well, let me just go ordinance for an introduction. I'll say this. Ordinance for an introduction to be referred to committee with public comment prior to referral. The first bill in the traffic control map will be sent to Public Works, and remaining bills referred to and taken up by council's respective budget hearings. Go ahead, Mr. Hanlon, go ahead, all yours.
Bill 65 is an amendment to the traffic control map. Bill 66 is the solid waste fee. 67 is the solid waste fund. 68 is the 911 fund. 69 is the Trexler fund. 70 is the golf course fund. 71 is the risk fund. 72 is the equipment fund. 73 is the liquid fuels fund. 74 is the administrative order fund. 75 is the debt fund. 76 is the capital projects fund. 77 is the EIT tax rate. 78 is the general fund. 79 is the tax rate. 80 is the stormwater fund. 81 amends the stormwater utility fee by setting the stormwater utility fee at $20 for 500 square feet. And 82 amends the streets and utilities and public services code by creating a stormwater utility fee. That's it.
Okay.
Ordinances.
Read the resolution for introduction.
Resolution for introduction is R121. It approves the capital improvement program from 2018 to 2022.
Thank you, Mr. Hanlon. We will now go into our meeting for this evening. Budget discussion, finance. Mr. Hartzell, it's good to see you and your staff here. I will turn it over to the chairperson of Budget and Finance, Mr. Greedy. You can take the lead and we'll just follow along.
Thank you, Mr. President. Probably what we can do, if you don't mind, is talk a little bit about the monthly report and then go into the finance, into the budget, and do it that way. So if we can go into the September, the month of September financial report, give us a little idea of anything that you saw that we should know, that we should talk about.
Thank you, Councilman Grady. The one disappointment I'll admit that I have, and this is for public consumption, is that by $30,000 we missed going positive in September at the Gulf Fund. I suspect, though, we've had some warm weather of late, and that after October we will finally get there. Everything else is pretty much the same old that we've had for the last several months, and both revenues and expenditures are continuing at our expected paces for the year. I would say at this point, we have estimated roughly a $1.8 million difference between what was budgeted, and that we're going to come in under budget by $1.8 million. Which means that we will have used $1.8 million of reserves, since we had $3.6 million of reserves that we had told you all that we were using for this year. We're going to be able to have that. And no other surprises I can see on the scene at this point. I think we're just very happy that we are able to manage funds as efficiently as we're doing to carry out the city's business, and look forward to getting into the budget discussions.
Thank you. Any comments from?
A question. You said 3.6.
Mm-hmm.
Wasn't it 3.9?
3.6.
3.6.
Yeah. And the 2017 budget book will have, oh, are you talking about the reserve for 18? I was going back a year.
Okay.
I was referring to, because we're doing the September 17 report.
Okay.
We'll cross that bridge in a little bit, because we had taken 3.6 million out of the reserve for this year, and we're going to end up halving that amount.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Good, thank you.
So, and by the way, Mr. Hodges said, we're just talking about September finance report right now, monthly reports. So, any comments from the dice?
They have presented me a copy of this, by the way, so I can go into details if anyone wants to have any questions.
Okay. If not, probably what we can do is move into the budget report. Budget presentation for the finance. I'm sorry, you have any comments, Ms.?
We're gonna do it in public?
We're gonna do it as, at the end, but if you wanna talk now,
It is a different issue.
you can come over and talk now, Mr.
The monthly finances,
Yeah, for the monthly finance.
monthly finances, yeah, but the rest we're gonna package
I
together.
think that's what you wanna talk about, just the monthly finance,
Yeah.
Mr. Hirschman, right?
It's a report, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Thank you, Hirschman, 405 North Gilmer Street, Allentown. My first question is, Mr. Hartzell promised us how much interest we're gonna earn for the year of 2017, and I don't see anything on this report that shows how much interest we earn.
I will respond.
Go right ahead, sir.
There is going to be still in the neighborhood of between 10 and 20,000 that we would get annually from things that we normally do that's going to show up in there. The Manning and Pier trade-off that is still waiting departure at this point, because we are right now in the midst of, we've been doing a lot of testing this week with moving things over from Wells Fargo to TD Bank. And that testing is proceeding deliberately, and we're getting a lot of sense that they're taking our accounts on very smoothly. We're not going to go into the process with Manning and Napier until we are sure that all of those accounts have moved over correctly, because we will be drawing upon those reserves for what we're going to give them for investment income, which we have factored in for next year.
And I think you, Mr. Hartzell, you also promised the financial advisor we hired what the cost would be, and can you tell us what the cost would be for the first 9 months for this financial advisor that we hired?
If we were to go to a financial advisor,
The one we hired, an advisor of money here.
well, yeah, at this, and again, if, let's see, if we're talking about the short-term cash,
Yeah.
Manning and Napier does not take a penny from us, they take it from commissions and fees from what we invest with them. And if there were no purposes, if they could not guarantee us a solid return above what those fees are, we wouldn't invest any money with them. That's where their dollars will come from.
So in other words, we don't know by hiring them, did it benefit us?
Again, the time in doing the transfer over to TD Bank is nearing its end, and we are just about ready to deploy that.
And the report that you did provide us, this revenue summary shows us our expenditures do exceed our revenue by about $6 million, right? So we do have financial problems maybe facing us for 2018. Am I correct? I don't know. In other words, your revenue shows 98 million and your expenditures show 104.
What-
So we're off a couple, aren't we all?
Go right ahead.
The budget will indicate, the 2018 budget, if you look in the A&E column, that against what was the budgeted amount of about 98.9 million, that our A&E is coming in at 99.9. So that's $1 million to the good side on revenue. The expenditures, which were in the budget showing at 105.0, which does include the POD payment for this year, we are now looking at coming in around 104.2, and there's the other $800,000 in savings on the expenditure side. So what was a $3.6 million hole is now coming out to about a $1.8 million hole, and the A&E data that you have in the 2018 budget will verify that. And we just, for the purpose of the revenue and expenditure report, we stick with the actual budgeted amounts, and then you can see versus how we do against that starting point of the year, where we're at during the course of the year. But that's where that difference is coming from.
And the parking authority, we're not gonna get that $1 million. In other words, we're a little short here by about 400 grand.
Not sure entirely where we're going to end up with the parking authority yet. I will say, though, that in the course of the year, when we do the estimates on revenues, there are some in which we're going to come in ahead of what we expected. There are some in which we're going to lag. And for the whole of the year, against a expected return of 98.9 million, we're now having an actual cash that we're expecting of 99.9 million. So in the aggregate, we're going to be $1 million to the good side.
Well, that's not my question. My question is the parking authority, are we gonna get the money they committed to us, $2 million?
I expect that we will get from them what they have available to do so. give us.
Okay, my friend, the golf course fund, you went over pretty quickly with it. You know, there's still a deficit and it's a little too cold to golf.
Let's see what happens.
Have to raise the rates.
No, how much of a deficit?
No,
It's in there.
it's down to 30,000 at the end of September.
Yeah. Mr. Hahn, yes, sir.
2016 East Highland Street. Julio, the question that I'm asking is the answer that we got from Mr. Hartzell about doing business with the bank where the profit that we pay them comes out of the dividend, which is a loss to the city if we did it in-house instead of paying someone and the profit on there. Can you get me an explanation how that works, that it actually saves money when they're taking what would be the interest or the thing on the money, but that doesn't get against us because we didn't get that money?
I got you. Mr. Hudson.
Well, I will answer Mr. Hahn's query in two ways. Right now, as we're continuing the transition from Wells Fargo to TD Bank, our available pooled and non-pooled cash that we have in reserve is getting something around 0.1% interest. The plan with Manning and Napier is it's going to amount to essentially a 0.32% annual maintenance fee plus custodian fee. And our expectations with them are that we're going to come in a full percent above that in terms of actual revenue. So that when we, 1.32 minus 0.32, we'll be getting a 1% return at least, instead of a 0.1% return. So that's, on whatever investments we have, that's a significant improvement from what we're doing at this point. The second point I want to make here, I know this issue has come up before about having the investment services in-house. If I were like the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and had an entire division dedicated to doing those investments, I might very well take advantage of that. But our staff has other focuses that we do very well in terms of revenue collection, delinquent revenue collection, making sure that we have clean opinions in our financial statements, making sure the procurement is done appropriately. And in this instance, we want to do those things perfectly well, and there are only so many of us to go around. And so for that reason, from a practical standpoint, we're very happy to bring Manning and Napier on board.
So do we have a number that goes with that answer?
The number that goes with
In other words, what will the 1%?
an actual number, I don't know. Do you have enough?
We actually have included that in the 2018 budget. We have factored in a $60,000 expected return. That is, if we were to put $5 million down with them, which is what we are considering doing, a 1% return on that would be $50,000, and there is a little bit of other investment income that does come in during the year. I'm hoping we can do even better than that because the interest rate environment is becoming much more, interest rates are going up a little bit. But that's how we factored it in for next year. And yes, getting back to Mr. Hirschman's query, I was hoping that we would be able to have that conversation, already start with that investment for them, but we are getting well along in the process of completing the transition to TD. And after that, we will get in touch with Manning and Napier and make those investments. I talk with them on a fairly regular basis to let them know that.
If I'm not out of line, I'm following this like I did other funds that turned from profit to loss because they came as investments and went to loan funds, and so that the money at that time that was supposed to collect interest wasn't coming in. Are you following me?
Yeah, this is different, but go ahead.
Well, that's what I'm trying to watch. I have another area to watch, similar to the lockbox I was wanting, where it became a loan fund, and the interest that was supposed to be a saving didn't happen. And so when I hear his answer, it sounds like all we have to do is change the name of what we're doing, and the money disappears.
Thank you, Mr. Hahn. Mr. Hunsaker.
Wetlands Center, 844 South Walnut Street. I want to stay on what Mr. Hahn was saying. How much money is invested with this new investment advisor? You know.
When the time comes, part of the agreement that we have with them is that we have to invest at least $5 million. And we already have some funds picked out in that range, maybe a little bit more, that are intended to be utilized for that. And we want to make sure, that was part of the agreement, that we could get the low transaction fee rates that we're getting as long as we invest $5 million with them. There is surely enough between the pooled and non-pooled cash that we can draw upon that we can safely do that.
Right now, we don't have anything invested with them?
Not at this time.
And the projection of the $5 million, is that gonna be the stabilization money? Is that what you're thinking?
We will only be sure that whatever we take, because we've been looking at this very carefully, that there are no legal problems with whatever source that we put over there. If there's anything that would be a legal snag in it, we're not gonna draw upon those resources. But I'm not concerned that we'll have $5 million to give them.
Now this number is not the cash reserve number. It's a separate number, right? Or is that part of the cash reserve? Is that part of it?
It is part of the cash reserve, yes.
Okay.
Thank you, sir. All right, we finished that. Let's move on to the budget now, finance department budget. Mr. Hirschman, Mr. Hudson. Mr. Hudson. Would you please run us through your departments, and I know you have a couple of employees and some of the budgets and other departments that are going to get paid from the stormwater funds and also the other one.
Thank you, Mr. Greedy. I will begin my remarks with a general discussion about revenues and expenditures, primarily in the general fund, because that is what is commonly done at this particular session. I want to lay out a few rather important summary points about what's on both on the revenue and the expenditure side in the general fund budget. We had mentioned in the mayor's budget message that our recurring baseline revenue, if we're just comparing the same sources that were budgeted in 2017 to where we expect they're going to come in 2018, that we're going to get about $4 million more. Those sources alone come out to about $103 million. That is both taxes and other existing fees that we're doing. A lot of that is that we have a full year's effect of the 2017 EIT increase, where we only had 3/4 of a year effective of this year. But we're also outperforming expectations on business privilege tax, and the staff behind me deserves, particularly Ms. Dickert and Mr. O'Neill and their team deserve a whole lot of credit for what they're doing on that. Overall, what we had been expecting to see as increases in revenue in last year's 5-year plan are not only doing as we expected, maybe even a little better in the aggregate. Now, you have heard about that there are also added fees in here for planning and zoning, along with and building standards, along with the intention of the Director of Community and Economic Development to put more of a comprehensive focus that's in that space. I will defer to his session to go into the details of what that is, but I will say from a revenue impact that we expect that to turn in at least another $800,000 on top of the $4 million that we'd already mentioned. So our revenue estimate comes in pretty close to $104 million, which is up $5 million or so from what we had estimated for revenues this year. So that's the good news on the cash side. And I've already mentioned that we are, yes, sir.
Mr. Reed, I'll wait till you're finished with the revenue.
Okay.
Go ahead.
This is probably a good point to do that, because those are the deltas from 2017.
Earned income tax, 26.1 to 28.5. Building permits and fees, 620 to 966.
Mhm.
Pre-sales inspections, 160 to 450. What have we been missing in 2017, 2016, 2015, 2014?
I can answer the EIT question very quickly.
Okay.
Remember that the new rate of 1.975%, we did not see the effects of that until April in 2017. So we only saw really 3/4 of that effect, and we're going to have a full year's effect of that coming in 2018. And those collections are coming in better than we thought they would, which is also helpful with that. With respect to the increases in those fees, I'm not dodging the question, but I think Mr. Leitner will be in a very good position when it comes time for his part of the budget to explain those things in detail, because that's a rather important centerpiece of what we're providing in the revenue proposal for this year.
Any further question, Mr. President?
No, that's, I mean, if those projections hold true, then, yeah, that's good. Real good.
Okay.
That's where we're aiming.
Time will tell. Okay, gotcha. Thank you, Mr. Hudson.
Go ahead, Mr. Harrison.
And as we make the transition to expenditures, I've already mentioned that we have halved, whatever you want to say it, our anticipated operating deficit for 2017. And as a result, we are anticipating a reserve of unrestricted cash in the general fund of $8.5 million, with which to begin 2018. And just for clarity's sake, yes, that $8.5 million does include the $4.8 million stabilization fund as part of that total. A couple of things have happened on the expenditure side that are very important to mention at this point. We are going to be moving more than $3 million out of the recurring general fund budget as a result of creating the stormwater fee and the stormwater fund. About $3 million of what was in the general fund will be shifted into the stormwater fund as part of the fee that is proposed in the budget. So that's a savings in that aspect. On the other hand, there are a couple of issues that have pushed the overall expenditure curve a bit higher than we had anticipated at this time a year ago. First of those is that the Aggregate Pension Board decided this year that the intended rate of investment or rate of return on the investments that we have in the police and fire pension funds was brought down from 7.75% to 7.5%, and for the O&E fund from 6.75% to 6.5%. The consequence of that, while I think it is a very wise decision on the whole to make sure that we have reasonable expectations of investment returns in that fund, was that it was going to bump up our MMO, our required obligation that we had to present to make sure that we were keeping the pension funds fully funded. And we also, along with trying to plan for the future, included an extended mortality table that was more realistic of longer lives that people are living, and that had a little bit of an effect that was added to that total. So a large portion of what we saw on the up curve had to do with the new assumptions that were being put in place to be realistic about what we're going to expect for return on pension funds in the future. And I would say also to that effect that the new rates we have for MMO are locked in for 2 years. So for the 2019 budget, the numbers that you see here should hold pretty much steady across the board. I'm hoping, of course, with respect to the police fund, that if we continue to have the investment returns that we're getting this year, that we might even come down a little bit, but I'm not holding my breath. I'm just saying that we're going to be pretty stable across for expenditures to cover pension obligations in 2019 with where we have gotten to in 2018. The other item that has, I think, shifted a little more than I had originally anticipated is our continued need for rolling stock, meaning fleet for the city, fire vehicles, police vehicles. The $6 million drawdown for 3 years that we are in the process of completing will cease to exist as of December 31st. We are in process now of making sure that the entirety of that fund is being used to pay for not just for rolling stock, but for other things like police body cameras, IT, upgrades, et cetera. But we're still going to have a significant need to replace fleet vehicles, and particularly fire trucks and police cruisers. And so we are going to an intended short-term loan that I would estimate is in the neighborhood of about $4 million. We're going to try to spread it out over 5 years to cover most of the rolling stock. We have put in a placeholder kind of similar to what would have been there the first year of the previous short-term loan to be able to cover the costs of stretching out those payments over a 5-year period. And that will be intended to make sure that we are keeping up to date on all of our citywide fleet, keeping them in good shape, and all of our police cruisers, keeping them up to date and appropriately refreshed. There will be a separate item also in the budget that we are intending when it comes to fire apparatus, that the intention is to add one more vehicle, one more fire apparatus for 2018 and a second for 2019. And our expectation in that aspect is that we're going to try to stretch those out if we can get them done through an RFP over at least a 7-year repayment schedule on those. And the monies for those aspects are already inside the budget. It may not be as clear perhaps in looking at the numbers as that, but that is the intention of bringing on 2 new fire apparatuses. I guess that's the right term, over the next 2 years, in addition to what we already have.
In the mayor's summary, it was 2 new fire engine pumpers.
We're putting in the financing for both, beginning right now. It's going to be laid out over that time frame, and we're going to pay it off over probably a 7-year period.
I want to, let's go back. Casino fee, you're optimistic. How optimistic are you?
I will be really optimistic when I see the next $1 million paycheck show up from the Pennsylvania Revenue Department, which we actually received our third quarter payment, which was, as I expected, only about $120,000. I have been in contact with the Pennsylvania Municipal League, as well as with Senator Brown's office, and my understanding of this is that we will get our full amount under the existing law for 2017, and that the 2018 amounts, which we have factored in as pretty much that keep steady right now around 3.8, 3.9 million, are likely to come in, because my understanding of the law is that the law was untouched with respect to the distribution of SANS funds to Allentown, Bethlehem, and the other localities. And again, my understanding is that revenue stream will not be diminished in any other way that we have, because of the additional provisions allowing for gaming in the state out of the bill, that the additional monies will end up being where they get distributed more widely.
Maybe we'll get a satellite casino, huh? Of course, maybe a couple of them, one in the north side, the south side, the side, west side.
I have no idea about that one.
One other thing, pretty optimistic on CDBG reimbursements. That went up.
We have tried very well in the last year to get a much better handle on what we expect in terms of reimbursements. And Ms. Fulweiler on the front row and Ms. Quigney and the staff in CED have been working very hard to get those numbers locked in. I'm very confident with what we have showing there.
Thank you, Mr. Hartzell.
Thank you. Just going back to the casino, I think I read something, the casino fee. I read something that said that some of the money will go to the host community. They reinstated that in the new budget. But with that, the agreement that was done before with the community, would that stay into effect?
The distributions from the Sands Casino remain in effect, as I understand it, from the law, that they did not change.
From the Sands Casino, but with the redistribution, if I may say, between the host community and the aggregate communities like Allentown and Easton, would that stay in effect?
My understanding, Mr. Garidi, is that all of those allocations that were in place with those fees remain the same.
Okay. So we're expecting the same amount?
That's what we have factored in as a result of it, yes.
Okay. Now, you said you have, you expecting another, there was another check coming up, right, at the end, at the beginning of the year?
If prior to the beginning of the year, we should see what was held back in terms of the slot machines, which was being held back as a result of the Supreme Court ruling. That I would expect for us to be seeing to be made whole before the end of 2017, and then be on normal pace for 2018. Now, I have a few other highlights that I wanted to mention as far as the overall budget goes, and I've talked about some of them already. It has been discussed, of course, about that we're taking $3.9 million in assigned reserves for extra payment of pension obligation bonds and instead directing it to cover pension MMO costs in this budget. As you have all seen, the amount that is showing that is specifically tied in assigned funds to that purpose comes in between 3.4 and 3.5 million. It was my understanding in the budget process that a few more categories of assigned funds for other purposes, including general government, could be made available to make up the difference to get us to 3.9. I'm going to give that a second look, and if there is indeed a problem with that, we will need to make adjustments on the appropriation side downward, but there was no intent to mislead at all on that. I had just gotten a sense at the time that that additional assigned revenue, which shows up in the CAFR, might be available. So we will, if we need to come back to that issue, we will do so. And I will also assure you, and thanks to Ms. Bowman's exceeding gifts in this area, that we are not at risk of ineligibility with respect to Act 205 for the non-resident earned income tax that is tied to paying off our pension obligations. She has been absolutely wonderful in being sure that we maintain our contributions above the Act 205 threshold, and to be sure that that tax can continue to be collected for paying off pensions. There will be pay increases across the budget, 3.5% for non-bargaining staff, and between 2.5 and 3.5% for bargaining staff, depending upon the individual collective bargaining agreements. I'm expecting that we will see pretty steady revenues compared with this year for both the Trexler Fund and for the Solid Waste Fund. And Mr. Messinger could probably talk on the next one a little bit more carefully, but there has been an increase in the gas tax that has been rolling through over the last year, and so we might see a bit of an increase in the liquid fuels fund as a result of that. And we have budgeted for that as fully as we can. And one last thing I want to raise about this, because you will have noted the 5-year plan is not in the back of the book. The mayor is very cognizant that we need to get that thing out before the end of the year, and it would seem under Section 308 of the charter that is how we can do it. And we would like to put that plan out there once we come to a final agreement on the budget, because I've already been figuring out some of the numbers as far as expected revenue and expenditures, but it would probably be good to lock in those numbers, and then from that point I can make those projections accurately of where I think we're going to be from 2018 to 2022. And right now, other than the discussions I had about MMO and rolling stock, our expenditure and revenue growth as shown in the 2017 plan is pretty much continuing apace as we anticipated. And that really are my comments.
Thank you. Okay, I have a couple of quick questions, but I'm gonna give you the courtesy of the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Greedy. One question I have is, are there any salaries or personnel who are slated to get higher than the 3.5% increase?
There are not. There are no individual increases across the board, 3.5 for all non-bargaining.
Thank you.
Cross your fingers, hope to die.
No, I saw the final plan on this. I don't need to cross my fingers on that one.
You saw it?
Mm-hmm. We factored in a 3.5% across the board with no exceptions for non-bargaining.
For non-bargaining, 3.5 for bargaining, no exceptions for the non-bargaining.
No exceptions for non-bargaining at 3.5. The individual agreements for bargaining, I think it's 2.5 this year for SEIU. It's 3.5 for police and 3 for fire.
I saw one. It went well above 3.5. I'll share it with you, I don't wanna.
Okay. Well, what I know that we had baked in, it was intended that it was across the board 3.5. Maybe, I'm not sure if there's an individual position that you're noticing on this.
Individual position.
And I would be happy to have that conversation, but what we had put in as an understanding was 3.5 across the board with no
Yeah,
exceptions.
we'll talk offline. Better that way.
That'd be fair.
I want to go back to one other thing. And I apologize for jumping all over the place, but the EMS trans